Good evening, everybody. We've begun with the basic premise that St. John's Gospel is divided into two parts, the Book of Signs and the Book of Glory. I was on the phone today with one of the elders from Mount Carmel who said to me that his grandson came home from school with a very unique question. He said he was studying about Holy Week in religion class, and they were talking about Good Friday. And he said he wanted to know why, if it's the day that Jesus died, why would we call that good? Shouldn't that be a bad Friday? He said, and I had no clue what to tell him. So I just was explaining that it's the hindsight. It's the understanding of the cross as necessary for the resurrection. It's the understanding of the cross as the fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah that the perfect sacrifice would be offered. The lamb without blemish would be offered to the Father, and then the gates of heaven could be opened, salvation could be won. And I said, it's really the only way to get to Easter was going to be through the cross. So for our salvation, the crucifixion was a good thing, because without the crucifixion, we never would have gotten there. The gates of heaven would still be closed. And he listened, he said, how do I say that to a 6-year-old? He said, you might be getting a call in another day or two. You could try to explain it to him. But that's basically the premise of John's Gospel. The Book of Glory is the crucifixion, leading to the resurrection. It's where Christ stands up and says, this is the Father's will, and I've come to do it. The Book of Signs is really his book of credentials. These 7 signs are what build up the understanding of who Jesus is and what the power is that he has. We began with the wedding at Cana. Something so simple, something so humble. At a time when he said, it's really not right yet, and his mother just said, yes, it is time. Kind of kicked him out of the nest like a mother bird, and Jesus worked his first miracle that maybe a handful of people knew about. Jesus knew, Mary knew, and the stewards who were carrying the vases of water. From there we go into the raising or the healing of the royal official's son. We have the cure at Bethesda, where Jesus takes care of the paralytic who can't get into the water quickly enough, and the multiplication of the loaves. We have Jesus showing himself more and more the master of life, the holder of truth, because he's more and more showing that he can do what nobody else can. He can offer what nobody else can. But there's a constant call to faith. The constant call to, but you need to be able to believe in who I am and what I can do. So that when he seems like he's not about to work the miracle for the royal official, and the royal official says, sir, please. Jesus says, we don't find this faith everywhere. That even if I seem hesitant, he knows I can do this. He's believing I can do this. He's trusting I can do this. The multiplication of the loaves, the last of the signs, the last of the miracles that we talked about, adds the new development of the Eucharist. Jesus uses the words Eucharist, Eucharisteo, giving thanks. They use the word, John uses the word klasma for fragments. Klasma was the old church's term for hosts. It's distributed and then gathered back up again. And these are all things that would have been being done in the ancient liturgies. And then as we saw at the end, there were 12 baskets left over of all of this plasma that was distributed, of all this bread that was distributed, and there are 12 apostles. So in each of these signs, Jesus is teaching the apostles what their mission is going to be after he's no longer with them. But he's also talking to them about reliance on the Father and reliance on faith. That their power will come through him, but they have to come to the understanding first of who he is. We take that a little bit further now. They're up on the mountain. Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes. However that actually happened. Because there are some who are going to say, well, maybe really what that was an inspiration to love. That maybe Jesus took those 4 loaves and fishes and started to share them with everybody else. And then all these people coming for the feast who would have had provisions of their own began to share whatever they had with other people. And everybody was saying, I think the scriptures say he multiplied the loaves and the fishes, and that's what happened. But there are ways for those who want to say this wasn't a miracle to argue around it. The apostles have their 12 baskets, which perhaps they distributed more to other people to take home or whatever they did with them. It's getting to be nightfall. The people need to be dispersed to go back to their homes, to go out to wherever they're going to be staying for the feasts. Jesus is up on the mountain. He tells the apostles, you go ahead of me. And they're going to go down to the sea, and they're going to cross the sea. Now, the sea is only about 4 miles long, 3 to 4 miles long. Jesus is up with the people on the mountain. They get dismissed, and then we hear about the 5th sign. When it was evening, the disciples went down to the sea, a place where they're very comfortable. Remember, they're fishermen, so they're comfortable with boats. They're comfortable on the water. They know what they need to do. They go down to the sea. They embarked on a boat, and they're going across the sea to Capernaum. It was already dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. So he's still, as far as they know, getting rid of the crowds. But it's just a couple-mile walk. He told them, go ahead of me. So they're not concerned about him because they know he could do that couple-mile walk and meet them with absolutely no problem. Until the sea started to stir up and the wind was blowing. They rowed about 3 or 4 miles. And what did they see? Jesus walking on the sea. And he's coming near the boat. And they began to be afraid. Of what? They weren't afraid of the storm. They didn't yet realize that this was Jesus. And they just see now this figure walking. You have to figure it's dark, it's night. There are no lights around. They're out on the water. The water is choppy. There has to be some kind of a fog. And now they see this figure moving towards them. So they're frightened. And when they get frightened, he says to them, it is I. Do not be afraid. Now, by saying it is I, he's using the same words that God spoke to Moses from the burning bush. When Moses says to this voice coming from the bush, when I go and tell Pharaoh to let your people go, who do I tell him sent me? He's going to want to know what authority I have to say this. And the answer he gets back is, tell him I am sent you. Jesus begins to introduce himself to the apostles, to hint to the apostles that he is the Messiah, that he is the divine. And he tells them that first message, don't be afraid. Now they wanted to take him into the shore, into the boat. But by the time they're ready to take him into the boat, they were already on the sea. They were already on the land. Now, some can say perhaps Jesus was walking along the shore. If it was such a small lake, well, he could still be seen. It really wouldn't make much of a difference to the actual significance of this miracle. Because this miracle is not about the walking on the water. It's about something a lot more complicated, but also something a lot more important. Even from up on top of the mountain, Jesus knows that the apostles are having a hard time. He knows that they're on this boat and that this boat is getting bounced around. He's aware of the danger they're sensing. And at that specific moment, when they're in their fear, he comes to them. He was not detached from their suffering, but very much in the midst of their suffering, he saw them and he was with them. As they're rowing, he's walking right alongside with them. If you've ever heard that poem, Footprints, it's exactly that same spirit. That when there's just that one set of footprints, I was carrying you. Well, they're not alone in their suffering, and he helps them. Once they know that it's he, things calm down immediately for them, and they're safe at the shore. This miracle, this walking on the water, this appearing at that Sea of Tiberias, was known only to Jesus and his apostles. Nobody else was there. As far as we know, there were no other witnesses to this that went on. But what had he just done? He just gave them that commission. Take those 12 wicker baskets, and you're going to be the ones who carry on this mission after I'm gone. You're going to be the ones who are going to take what I'm doing, and you're going to be the ones who are going to bring this out to other people. But even if you don't see me, I am with you. Even if you don't see that I'm there, I'm part of what you're going to go through. And if you suffer, I'm there with you in that suffering, and I'm going to help. I'm not detached. Even when you might feel like you've been abandoned, even when you feel like you might be in danger, if you're doing what I asked you to do, I'm going to be with you. The miracle is now an encouragement to the apostles. He begins with that, it is I, in revealing who he is to them. But he promises too that that divine power is going to be with them always. And with that, they get into another miracle. When we talked about the healing of the paralytic at Bethesda, where Jesus goes and sees the paralytic there and says, did you want to be healed? And it's kind of like, that's why I'm here. I'm here to be healed, but I'm paralyzed. I can't get quickly enough when the water is stirred up. So Jesus says, well, pick up your mat and walk. Stand up, pick up your mat and walk. Now that was on a Sabbath, and that was what caused the problem. The man who was cured did not know Jesus. Jesus wanted to do this miracle, and it caused an encounter with the Pharisees. The Pharisees complained that the man was carrying his mat on the Sabbath, and then when he complained that he was carrying his mat on the Sabbath, they told him it was Jesus who healed him. They were angry that Jesus did this miracle on the Sabbath, that he worked this cure on the Sabbath, and that started to cause division between the Pharisees and scribes and Jesus. Well, we're going to have something very similar happening now. In the 9th chapter of St. John's Gospel, we have the story of the 6th of the signs, and that's the man born blind. The old mentality is expressed in the first 2 lines. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The mentality was that if the parents sinned, the punishment would be taken out on their children. So that since this child was born blind, he really couldn't have sinned himself. So the disciples are basically saying, he's suffering, but was it the parents who sinned, or is there something about this child that made him suffer? And Jesus said, neither he nor his parents have sinned, and so that the works of God might be made visible through him. There's a reason we're coming across this man today. We're coming across this man today because somehow through him, you're going to see the glory of God. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And again, we have that contrast between night and light, night and day. And Jesus says, I'm bringing the light. You're going to see what's going to happen here. Because right now there's darkness. And this is going to be a constant theme, especially in this miracle, because we're talking about blindness. We're talking about this man's inability to see. But it's going to become a tremendous contrast. It's going to become a real conflict in a couple of verses, where we see that there's another kind of blindness. When he said this, he spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva, and smeared the clay on his eyes. Now, I had a grandmother who, if you fell and you got a bruise, she would take out her handkerchief and then clean up the bruise with it. In the Old Testament mentality, in the Jewish mentality of the time of Jesus, saliva was considered healing. It was considered something cleansing. So when they said he used his saliva, that would have been a typical first aid move in the time of Jesus. What's amazing is that when he makes the clay, he goes and he touches the eyes of the blind man. So many of us, if we see somebody who has some type of a disability or an infirmity, it's don't stare, don't look. But Jesus rather gets very intimate and goes immediately to that part of the man where there was pain, where there was something that was hurting him. Jesus immediately goes, he makes this spittle, and he goes right to his eyes, and he takes this very intimate act of smearing, and he says, now go wash in the pool of Siloam. Siloam is the word which means sent. So he went and washed and came back able to see. The one who was sent, the one who is sent by God, is the Messiah. The one they were waiting for. The one they were waiting for God to send, who would heal them, who would forgive them, who would open up heaven for them. So washing in the pool of Siloam, remember, these Gospels are written 30 years after we have a beginning of the foundation of a church. So being washed in the waters of the one who is sent is baptism. So baptism, the giving of faith, the welcoming of someone into the faith, is the opening up of the eyes. It's giving someone the ability to see what really matters. To see not with the eyes, but to see with the heart. He had this intimate encounter with Jesus and could see. In the intimate encounter of baptism, where we're washed in the waters of the one who sent, we can now see with the eyes of faith. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said it is, but others said, "No, it just looks like him." He said, "I am. That was me. You saw me begging. Now you see me not begging because now I can see. Now I can work. Now I could do." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" And he replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know." How could he know? He was blind. He heard Jesus' name. He didn't see Jesus. Jesus went to him, saying he wanted to perform that miracle. So the people didn't know what to do. So they brought the blind man to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened the eyes on the Sabbath. Again, we're coming into the Sabbath law. So the Pharisees asked him how he was able to see. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes and I washed and now I can see. So some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a sinful man do such things? And now there's division even within the Pharisees. Some of them are seeing what Jesus is doing, and others are saying he shouldn't do that on a Sabbath. And they're having that conflict of, but he's doing something good. But he's doing it on the wrong day. Why couldn't he come yesterday? Why can't he do this tomorrow? And they're now having that law versus faith conflict among themselves. They're blind to the goodness and the power of Christ. But their blindness is by choice. And there's the contrast to the blindness of the man born blind. He was not blind by choice. They were. He was able to see the power of God working through Jesus. They chose not to be. Faith is a choice. Whether or not we're going to live according to what we say we believe is a choice. So they said to the blind man again, what do you have to say about him since he opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight until they summoned the parents of the one who gained his sight. Now you could picture a movie director or a stage director having a wonderful time with this. Here's this man just blind, begging. Jesus goes over and touches his eyes and heals him, and he goes to the pool and washes. Now he comes back and he's talking with his neighbors. He finishes talking with his neighbors. They bring him to the Pharisees. Now the Pharisees don't know what to make of him. They say, well, you know what? Maybe you really weren't blind to begin with. So now they call in his parents, and now they want to talk to his parents. They ask them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? And his parents answered and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He can speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Messiah, he would be expelled from the synagogue. So already that subterfuge of rumor and gossip is starting to go through. For this reason, his parents say, he is of age, question him. Fear. The Pharisees are using that power of fear. So a second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. And he replied, if he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I know, I was blind and now I see. And there it is. There's the simple crux of it. I was blind and now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? I told you and you did not listen. You chose your blindness. You chose that separation. Or are you having doubts now? And he turns it around so that all of a sudden, instead of them interrogating him, he's beginning to interrogate them. So they're going to have to answer, and they just ridicule and say, you're that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from. The man answered and said to them, That is what is so amazing, that you don't know where he's from, yet he opened my eyes. And the Pharisees are being hit with that basic reality. You're the ones who teach us to wait for the Messiah. You're the ones who teach us that God has given us the promise of one who would be sent to heal us. Yet you don't recognize him. How can you teach us to look for what you yourself are refusing to see? We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It's unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a blind person. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything. They answered and said to him, and they go right back to the old mentality, you were born totally in sin, and you're trying to teach us? And then they threw him out. They've made their choice. They don't want to hear about Jesus. They don't want to hear about the good that he's done. They don't want to hear about him being from God. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he already did what Jesus wanted them to do. Jesus wants this battle. He wants this showdown with the Pharisees. He found him and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered and said, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? He still has not seen Jesus. He still has not seen Jesus to know that this is who he's talking to. The only encounter this man has had directly with Jesus was when he was still blind. So he says to him, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, I do believe, Lord, and I worshiped him. When he's first asked, who did this? He says, the man called Jesus. When the Pharisees say, who do you think he is? He says, he is a prophet. When he finally sees Jesus face to face, he calls him Lord. And in this brief scene that we have, this scene that probably took just several hours, all on a Sabbath afternoon, this blind man teaches us the process of faith. Because he goes from understanding Jesus as a man to understanding him as a prophet, to recognizing him as the Lord. Then Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do not see might become blind. Those who didn't see him, those who didn't know him, those who had no hope, find that hope in Jesus. And those who had all the answers begin to realize how futile the answers they had actually were. Those who were blind because no one ever taught them are given the gifts of faith and sight. And those who are arrogant enough to presume they don't need that faith lose even what they have. It was the author G.K. Chesterton who once wrote that Jesus came to comfort the disturbed, but to disturb the comfortable as well. And precisely there is what Jesus is saying, that those who are blind by choice, well, they'll find their punishment. But those who are willing to be open to what he has to offer, they're going to gain that sight that really matters. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, surely we are not also blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, we see, so your sin remains. Because now, their sin, now their refusal to hear more about Jesus, who he was, what he did, is won by choice. The blind man is very vocal. As a matter of fact, some of this is very comic. You could picture someone in a very funny way saying to them, now wait a second, you're supposed to be teaching us about this, but you don't know it yourself? Or do you want to be one of his disciples? And you could see them just getting more and more frustrated as he's being more and more terse with them. But then we see those Pharisees where they're not quite as vocal, because even their faith is at a point of hesitation. If we look at the beginning of this gospel and the end, the one who was blind was able to see clearly who Jesus was. And the ones who professed to be able to see everything are the ones that are the most ignorant and who see and understand the least at the end. And the bottom line is division. Only here at the end do Jesus and the Pharisees actually have a tete-a-tete, where they actually get into a conversation now themselves. And the Pharisees are going to leave very disturbed. And already they're going to start having that, we have to silence him, or change everything about us. And they're not going to have that willingness. But they don't know how to do it. They don't know if they're going to be ready yet to make the change that they want to make. They don't know if they're going to have anything yet that they're going to have where they can actually go against Jesus and have him put to death. They could have stoned him for this, because he did that work on a Sabbath. But with everybody else who's around, with the townspeople, with the parents, seeing that this blind man now sees, they dare not touch him. But that subterfuge is already there. That feeling is already there. And all they really need is one more thing to put them right over the edge. And we're going to talk about that at the Soup and Scripture Supper next Wednesday, because it's going to be the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Because at that moment, once that has happened, and Jesus has shown himself to be Lord even over death and life, then the Pharisees have no choice but to either acknowledge him as the Messiah or to put him to death. They either have to silence him completely or accept him completely. And ultimately, that's the whole point of the book of signs. Jesus is giving signs as to who he is. And for those who accept those signs and understand who he is, then the crucifixion is a Good Friday, because it's the fulfillment of the Father's will and the passage to the kingdom, the passageway to the resurrection. For those who cannot accept him for who he is, that will never make sense. With that, we'll stop for tonight.